All right, this is standard number 68, graphing quadratic functions. So first of all, quadratic function, we use the form f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is the same form we've been talking about when we've been talking about factoring quadratic expressions. This f of x just is one, it's a function, but really this is the same thing as writing y. Okay, so the shape of the graph of a quadratic function is called a parabola. Okay, so that's this U-looking shape over here. A quadratic function is always going to give us that shape, either facing up like it is now or facing down. So I'm going to point out some important pieces of this graph. This point right down here is going to be called our vertex. Come on. Okay, and then there's a line that goes through my vertex. So this line that goes all the way up through here, this line is called my axis of symmetry. Okay, so axis of symmetry. Okay, and a parabola is always going to be symmetrical. So symmetrical just means the same on both sides. So here's my axis of symmetry. My parabola is going to be the same on both sides. Okay, so let's talk about the steps of graphing a quadratic function. The first thing we're going to do is find that vertex. Okay, so find this starting point that we talked about. Okay. Then the next thing we need to do is create a table. So when I'm talking about creating a table, we're just talking about an X, Y table. Okay, so you guys have probably created these before. You know, you find an X value, you plug it in to find your Y value. Okay, and then we're just going to graph our points along our graph. Okay, so let's go ahead and do an example problem. So it says use a table of values to graph our function y equals 3x squared plus 6x minus 4. Okay, so the very first thing I always need to do is find my vertex. Okay, so we're going to use that function, that equation that I put on the last page of just x equals negative b over 2a. Okay, so looking at our function, remember the a always comes first, so that's our a, this is our b, and then this one out here is our c. Okay, so my b is 6, but since it says negative b, I need to make it a negative 6. Okay, and then over 2 times my a value, which in this case is 3. Okay, so I would have negative 6 over 2 times 3 is positive 6, so negative 6 over positive 6 is just going to give me negative 1. Okay, so that means my x value of my vertex point is negative 1. Okay, so I need to find my y value as well. So, because remember a point is always going to be the point x, y. Okay, so I have my x value. Now to find my y value, I'm just going to take this x value and I'm going to plug it back into my original equation here. So I would say y equals 3, and then instead of saying x squared, I'm going to say negative 1 squared. Okay, and then plus 6 times negative 1, and then minus our 4. Okay, so now we can just type this in our calculator just like we see it, or we can do it out by hand. It is going to take a little longer if we do everything by hand, but let's go ahead and simplify this out. So negative 1 squared is just going to give me 1, so I would have 3 times 1, and then 6 times negative 1 is going to give me negative 6, so minus 6, and then minus 4. Okay, so Now, if we just put this in our calculator, 3 times 1 is 3. So we would do 3 minus 6 minus 4. So we'd get our y value equals -7. Okay, so my y value is -7. So my vertex then is going to be the point -1. And then my y value is -7. Okay, so that's my vertex point right there. Okay, this is going to be important to us. Okay, so then now, let me give myself some space. Now we're going to create our XY table, okay, to find our points for our graph over here. Let me actually erase my work here so that we can have some more space. Okay, so we create our X, Y table. All right, so I'm going to use my vertex as my starting point, okay? So my X value of my vertex is -1, okay? I already know my point is negative, my vertex is -1, -7. Okay, so you always want to have at least two numbers on the lower side of your vertex, okay? So, you know, -2 and -3. Okay, so I'm going backwards on my number line. And then I also want to have two numbers greater than this -1. Okay, so 0 and +1. Okay, you can always do more, but you need to at least have two X values on either side of your vertex. So this was our vertex here. Okay, so this one is our vertex. So that's our starting point. Okay, so now we just need to go through and find our y values. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to take my x value and I'm just going to plug it back into my equation up here. Okay, so I would say y equals 3. Instead of putting x, I'm going to put a -3, okay, because I'm plugging in this x value over here. So -3 squared plus 6 times -3, and then -4. Okay, so I just took that, I plugged -3 into my original equation up here, 3x squared plus 6x minus 4. Okay, so now we can do that by hand just like I did with the vertex, or we could just type this in our calculator. Okay, so whenever I did this by hand, I got a +5. Okay, so go ahead, put that in your calculator, see if you get a +5. Okay, so that was for the -3. Okay, so now I need to go through and plug in my -2. Okay, so I would do the same thing. So y equals my 3, and then I'm going to plug in -2 for x. So -2 squared, and then plus 6 times -2 and -4. Okay, so we put this in our calculator, 3 times -2 squared plus 6 times -2 minus 4. Okay, so either type that in your calculator or do it by hand. When we do that, we should get a -4. Okay, so now I need to continue. I already have my vertex at this point. Now I need to continue to find the rest of these points. Okay, so let's go ahead and plug in our 0. So 0 is going to be easier to plug in. So y equals 3 times 0 squared, okay, plus 6 times 0 minus 4. Okay, so if I go through, plug all this in my calculator, 3 times 0 squared plus 6 times 0, all of this is just going to give us 0. So then 0 minus 4, I'm just going to have a -4. Okay, and then now we just need to plug in our very last point. So let's go ahead and plug in 1. So I need to do y equals 3 times 1 squared plus 6 times 1, and then minus 4. Okay, so then if I plug all this in my calculator or I do this by hand, when I did that, I would get positive 5. Okay, so if you guys notice, this was our vertex here. Okay, so if you guys notice, actually the values that are going to be on either side of your vertex, since it's symmetrical, so when I go 1 over, they should both be -4, and then 2 up, they should both be positive 5. Okay, remember we talked about in that last slide that it's always going to be symmetrical. All right, so now I just need to plot these points. So I'm going to do -3, positive 5, so -3, and then up to positive 5. Put a point there. Okay, so that's one of my points. And then -2, -4 is going to be my other point. Okay, now I'm doing -1, -7, so that's my vertex right there. Okay, so I know it should be going back up. So then 0, -4, and then 1, 5. Okay, so now I just need to connect my points. Make sure when we connect our points we have kind of that U shape. Okay, try to do a little better job than me. My computer's kind of laggy. All right. Okay, so here is your one you try problem. Okay, so graph these using your table of values.